just wait till that. Thank you. Okay, and hi, and welcome to the Supporting the Video Games Industry in a Perfect World panel. We're incredibly lucky today to have quite a diverse range of personalities on the panel. We've got federal and state screen industry agencies participating. And I'll just quickly run down who the panelists are, then we'll get to an introduction later. So we've got Carolyn Pitcher, the CEO from Film Victoria, Kate Croser, CEO of South Australian Film Corporation, Alex Sangston, the Executive Manager of Screen Tasmania, Willie Rowe, CEO of Screenwest, Monica Penders, CEO of Screen Canberra, Kylie Munnich, it's CEO of Screen Queensland, and Dr. Christen Cornell, who's the Research Fellow and Manager of Research Partnership at the Australia Council for the Arts. And Christen's having a little bit of technical issues, so we hope she'll be certainly joining us during the panel. So welcome everybody. Thank you for generously giving up your time. I think it's the first time I can remember all the screen agencies getting together, at least to talk about video games. So we're incredibly excited about that. I might start off with a bit of a leading question for each of you and ask you, how important do you think games are to your overall program and your offerings? And what support mechanisms do you find within your state are unique to you? So, you know what, I'm going to actually hit up Kate first, because it was recently announced that South Australia introduced the first rebate in Australia.
Yes, thank you so much, Ron. And we are incredibly proud to, I suppose, be leading the way when it comes to a rebate for video game development in Australia. The South Australian government announced this in late June, and the rebate has taken effect as of the 1st of July. And the South Australian Film Corporation will be administering the rebate on behalf of the government. So we're really thrilled to be kind of broadening our approach to all screen agency, despite our name, and really looking forward to engaging much more closely with the game development sector. So the video game development rebate that we've announced is essentially, it's modelled on the really successful 10% PDV rebate that we've had in South Australia since early 2018. So it's essentially a 10% rebate on eligible expenditure that's undertaken in South Australia. So I suppose from an industry point of view, it's certain, it's fast, it gives that sort of underlying assurance to investors, and that's really what we're aiming to try and trigger with this is increase inward investment into the video game sector in South Australia, and growth of jobs and growth of sort of underpinning the scaling up of our video game sector here.
Thanks, Kate. And what about up north? Kylie, lots of stuff happening in Queensland.
There is, and I wish there was more game stuff happening in Queensland, and I certainly would encourage that. We really do consider games development to be equal of the three pillars that Screen Queensland supports with film, television and games. I'm a little bit jealous of South Australia's rebate. I think that was a real, literally game changer for the industry, and I'd love to be able to offer something like that. But at the moment, our support is more in development of the games, and also working with games developers in Queensland to help them grow their businesses or to reach further into the market, both nationally and internationally. But it's a really important part of the ecosystem, and you know, we consider the creative contribution that games developers make to Queensland to be equal with all of the screen industry here.
Great. And Canberra, the ACT, Monica.
Apologising for the noise in the background of the drills going off and the mowers. Look, I consider the games industry to be super important. We are, unfortunately, at this stage, we don't offer much towards games, and it's something I'm working on at the moment. We have an election coming up, so that is part of the request that I've put to the government to have a meaningful, mainly development to start off with, to prove the model of stage development for games. Obviously, we have a very strong educational component here in Canberra for games, which is through the Academy of Interactive Entertainment. Their main campus is here, and they've just announced a huge redevelopment of infrastructure here, which is really exciting. And I think it just shows just how important games are to us. We just need to catch up with the local funding to keep those, those students who are coming through, and also people who are in the industry.
Yeah, it certainly is exciting what AIE are doing there, and certainly when Game Plus set up in Canberra, New Hub was great to see the talent that's coming out of that working space. Willie, what about over in WA?
Yeah, I think a bit like Canberra, we've had a very, very small pilot program that we ran last year, which was really quite successful, and of the 5 projects that were supported development, 4 have gone on to find publishers. But we haven't had a full and broad developed gaming support program, which we are now looking to develop. And we're talking a bit like Monica, talking with our state government here in terms of how that's going to look and feel, and obviously looking at what's working around the country as to what might be of a significant advantage to grow the gaming sector in Western Australia. And so, Kate and the SAFC's rebate, I think, is really, really quite exciting, and it's something that we would look at potentially modelling our fund on. We are preparing a paper to go out, a proposal to go to the state government at the moment to broaden our offering in games, and like the rest of the country, gaming is really important. We don't need to tell anyone in this room today the scope of the industry, both nationally and globally, and the potential is huge. And so we're really quite excited, and we do have considerable buy-in from our government, which is great to see, and they're really keen to see the further development of gaming. As I say before, we put our toe in the water. It was very successful, and we're just looking forward to the next iteration of what we can do.
Thanks, Willie. How about the quiet achievers way down south, Alex?
Thanks, Ron, and thank you very much for having me on alongside my colleagues from the other states and territories. Look, we consider games like everybody else to be absolutely fundamental. What I find really interesting about the game dev sector is that it's got similarities to where we've come from in supporting what you might call linear content, but also massive differences. And I think that the challenge for governments and government agencies is to acknowledge those differences and adjust funding programs to make them more applicable to the game sector, but not throwing out the things that make those things really strong. In terms of what we do that's unique, I mean, really, we fund game development. The only thing that we do that's unique, which is really interesting, was actually a COVID program called the Art Screen Digital Program that was additional money provided by the state government, which was a stimulus measure, which was specifically designed for screen production organisations or individuals and organisations and arts practitioners to collaborate together to do a thing that otherwise couldn't be done because of lockdown. And one of the successful applicants to that, where I'm really excited to see what they come up with in the end, was one of our local game devs, Secret Lab, working with the internationally recognised puppet theatre company, Terrapin, to do an app version of one of Terrapin's games. An app version of one of Terrapin's shows, which will be absolutely gorgeous, and I really can't wait to see what they come up with.
That'd be very exciting. And Carolyn, quite often the envy of the rest of the country up to now. How's Victoria doing?
Thanks, Ron. Look, reiterating what everybody says, how important digital games is to the overall screen sector, and it has been for Film Victoria for 25 years. So we've been funding games now for a quarter of a century, which is sounding pretty epic. I think we're home to about 50% of the games businesses in Australia, and we have supported those through the traditional method of you know, funding development and also funding market-ready projects as well to get them to the publisher and to also get them promoted. We're looking at increasing that funding over a period of time as well, because what we have discovered is, particularly after a research project that we undertook last year, is that we are not growing at a rate that will be competitive with the global growth trajectory. So we have to look at ways in which we can ensure that our Australian industry is growing at a particular rate that is probably beyond incremental, it's actually exponential growth. And how do we support our games companies to do that? I think, you know, kudos to Kate and South Australia for introducing an attraction fund in relation to balancing out fee-for-service work along with the incredible importance of IP development in Australia. So I think that balance is really important, and I'm quite sure many states will be following in South Australia's footsteps to introduce a fund like that, as well as making sure that we're growing local IP. And really the results are there. Our incredible talent in Australia and in Victoria has seen us win the DICE Best Game of the Year in our entitled Goose Game, which, you know, is an incredible achievement for the entire Australian industry.
100% agree there. Christen, an interesting perspective. I mean, the Australian Council for the Arts doesn't fund games per se, but it'd be interesting to get your perspective here.
Yeah, it's not exactly correct to say that the Australia Council doesn't fund games. It's just that we don't have a kind of discrete funding category that has that name on it. We have had interaction with the games community over the years, but it hasn't been this discrete area of focus. That said, we're on the cusp of opening up to this sector. Even if you don't see funding even if you don't see games, that word, in our funding categories at the moment, that's not to say that you won't in future. In the meantime, though, there are ways of games developers applying for funding through the Australia Council for the Arts existing funding categories by positioning an application within multi-arts or with emerging and experimental or community and cultural development. There are examples of games that we've funded that have come through those categories. Or potentially for a game that might be a vehicle for another kind of arts project or arts practice, such as music or literature. And I can go into further detail about those funding categories later, if that's useful. But we also have other means of support beyond funding. Capacity building is a huge area of Australia Council work. And within that, we have mentoring programs and skills development. We're actively seeking to increase capacity building in games development at the moment. And then I work in the research team where we have a lot of work that feeds into broader advocacy and strategy. So in a lot of our research, we're seeking the intersections with other sectors, and this, like the game sector, is a really important example for where we can see this kind of possibility for interdisciplinary work from the subsidised arts sector to the games, to the more broader games industry. So our work in advocacy and strategy also has ramifications, I suppose, to the extent that we're also often advocating for the transferability of creative skills across different sectors, and also that we're often looking for partnerships. And I should also say that we have a growing interest in creative work in the online space at the moment. We're developing a new digital strategy, and we have this increasing interest in digital innovation and online business models. So all of these are kind of opportunities for the game sector, I suppose. They point to opportunities for greater collaboration, and with that, forms of potential support.
Yeah, that's great, Christen. And I think quite often we overlook the fact of the Council for the Arts as a place to go for resources and support and funding that's kind of outside the box. So it'd be great for particularly those who are watching the panel now to kind of dig a bit deeper into what's available. Look, it's really heartening from an IGEA point of view. It's really heartening that, you know, if I go back a number of years, there was no way we could have this conversation with the screen agencies because, you know, by design, by default, or just the way things unpack, just games weren't part of the conversation. And it's incredible that we fast forward and here we are in 2020, and pretty much every state and territory is happy to have a conversation and completely engaged with the industry. So I'm moving from that, and I'm going to ask a question with a couple of caveats. And, you know, the panel is all about the perfect world. What is supporting the industry in the perfect world look like? So I'm going to ask each of you, what would you do in a perfect world? But the caveat is that I'm not going to ask you to answer on behalf of your agency. I don't want you, you know, to think that you're locking yourself in. And I'm also not going to take copious notes and knock on your door next week saying, all right, here I am to call in all those things you promised. But it'd just be interesting to know what a landscape could look like. And, you know, how would you see that unpacking? How would your state unpack the perfect, or in your mind at least, unpack the perfect scenario? So I'm not going to pick Kate first because that wouldn't be fair. I'm going to pick maybe Monica first because she looked like she wanted to go first.
No. Look, I think it's a really interesting question. I think it's going to be different in every state. Mm-hmm. Obviously, in Victoria, if Victoria has 50% of the games companies, etc., they're at a different level to where we are. We have a lot of students. We have some smaller companies. Unfortunately, some of the bigger companies did, I think, move to Melbourne. So what I'm finding personally when I talk to games providers, the things that I feel that I should be offering them as a state agency is, first of all, business skills. A lot of them, I feel like there's a real lack of understanding of how to get something to market, how to present yourself properly, how to pitch, all of those kind of skills. I would like to be doing some work with them on building that. I feel like that their actual games development part is great, but just the how to get things to market, get it published, I think there's an area there that needs to be addressed. So the type of funding that I'd like to be looking at going forward and support would be tranched funding, in small tranches with milestones met to help them move along that pathway to market, just like what we would do with development in film and TV. I do agree. I thought what you were saying, Alex, was so true, that we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but we need to be making room for digital. And I'm thinking games, AR, all of the R's, hitherto unknown. We need to be building capacity within our content providers, and we need to be educating I know I have to be educating my government on something that they don't quite understand yet. They don't understand the scope of it. They don't understand how many people are actually involved in the industry, and they certainly do not understand how big the industry is worldwide. And so I think there's an opportunity there for upskilling with the government, as well as with film industry and with games industry people in our jurisdiction.
Thanks, Monica. And I guess Monica, through to you there, Alex. So.
And yeah, good segue, Monica, because you used the word I was going to go with, which is capacity building. I think if I had completely perfect world, I would be focusing on building up the physical capacity of our developers, who are largely going to be, we're in a similar situation to Monica, largely 1 or 2 person operations, and build them up so that they were 5 or 6 people operations with an office and with overhead and with equipment and with access to market and with money to spend to, when the world does finally open up again, to get to GDC and that sort of thing. So that would be what I would focus on, as much as focusing on the product itself, because I think while people are making games on their own, while there is absolutely the possibility they could come out with something amazing, I think the collaboration between people is going to stimulate much stronger creative outcomes. And beyond that, they're just going to be able to share the load a lot better and be able to focus more on making their games rather than trying to do it off the side of the desk while they're making a bob doing something else.
Actually, can I add to what I was saying before, and it goes into what Alex was saying? When I actually asked quite a few years ago now, a bunch of, they were recently graduated students, and some were already sort of in the industry. What can we do to support you? One of the young gentlemen said, money for pizza and electricity. That's all they needed. And I think that actually summed up exactly where they were at. That's all they were just focusing on that game and not understanding where it fits in. But I always remember that pizza and electricity, that's all that they needed money for at that stage. I think times have changed a little bit.
I think times have changed a little bit, but I hope you flung them $20 to help out with the pizza.
I got them some Dominoes. They were very happy.
Christen, how about you? What about the vision? You know, I guess it's a slightly different vision. Could you share that, what your perfect world would look like?
I suppose when I think of the perfect world for games funding at the Australia Council, it would be to have a specific funding category that was called games. And through that, games developers wouldn't have to argue the artistic merit of the work, nor would they have to kind of shuffle in through another arts funding category, their project, which was about developing a game that they could just kind of upfront say, we all know, they wouldn't even have to state the artistic merit, right? Because that would be the hurdle for somebody who is applying for funding from the Australia Council at the moment, is you would have to pick your category, and then you would have to argue how it had artistic merit, and you would probably have to call on some of your other expertise, whether it's in music or visual arts, in order to make that argument, to convince peers. And in a perfect world, that wouldn't need to be done. That kind of clever strategic work would be unnecessary, because there would be an understanding of games as a particular, as a culture which is legitimate in itself. But at the same time, I find this question interesting because when I think about games and the opportunities for the broader arts sector and the opportunities that the games industry has kind of at its fingertips from where I'm looking, I feel like I feel like you've almost got, you've got a pretty good situation at the moment, because the arts, many different industries have a lot to earn from the games industry, I would argue. And definitely at the Australia Council for the Arts, I think that we feel that there is a lot that we could learn through partnerships with the games industry. And again, this comes back to this like interdisciplinary environment that I think we live in. And I think that is, that games are in a pretty good position, actually. And I believe in working with the interdisciplinary situation that we have right now, rather than, I guess, imagining the perfect world. But if I had the perfect world, it would be the first.
Excellent. Kylie, have you reached your perfect world yet?
I unmuted in time. No, we're certainly some way from that perfect world, but something we did see during the worst of COVID in our state was the resilience of games companies and games developers, because many of them do work in either isolation or very small groups. The typical company in Queensland is only 1 to 3 people. So capacity building is certainly of interest to us, that we can help those companies grow to scale. But their resilience during COVID was really inspirational to lots of others in the screen and production sector. So I think we can learn a lot from that. We would love to have an enterprise program which helps games developers to grow their slate and their company, and to either, pivot and diversify or expand. That's something we'd love to do, and certainly something that we're looking at. And just also a graduate pathway program, because as Monica said, there are a lot of young people and studying in all aspects of game development all throughout Queensland at lots of different institutions. And I want to give them hope that there is a pathway to a career, that they will be able to develop and continue to create their work beyond their student days. So our incentives really need to help people around that, not just developing individual projects as we do now, but really helping get from concept to prototype development perhaps, and then, complementing some larger investments into games that we want to go into release. I think there's lots more we can do. We're very interested in talking to the industry and hearing from the creatives that we already work with in Queensland and others. We have our Screen Queensland Hub program, where we have a co-working space here in Brisbane and one at the Gold Coast, where we do actually have some games developers on site. So it's really great to be near them and around them, so that we can learn firsthand what's going to work to create an even bigger and better games ecosystem for us in Queensland.
Thank you. And Carolyn, what about Victoria? It's always had big visions.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. Look, my feeling is that we want, as Australians and an Australian digital games industry, to be in demand by gamers worldwide. We want to be known for our innovative games, our creative games, and also our you know, en masse popular games by consumers all around the world. So that is, what is our brand positioning globally, and how do we match that vision with capability and, as Alex said, capacity building. So we've got to have some form of strategy for that growth, and have a strategy for capability building, which is skills that we've talked about, scalability of businesses, so from very large, perhaps even publicly owned businesses on the stock exchange, down to 1 and 2 person innovative studios where they're developing one game. And how can we actually make an ecosystem of varying sized enterprises to ensure that we are flooding the global market with incredible quality and creativity and innovation in the game space that is Australian and known to be Australian. We've seen around the world that territories like Finland and Canada can do this. We see what New Zealand has put in place in terms of the federal government related fund and policy. Australia is behind in that, and we need to step up. And I dare say that we would find that all the state screen agencies would step up in unison with an Australian support mechanism for growing games. We know the value of games. We know how fast they're growing. They're growing faster than film and TV. It is worth more and will be worth more than film and television. And that we know that they're incredibly skilled jobs for the future. So it should be a no-brainer that this is an industry that we invest more in. And we have to be very aware of the ecosystem and how we invest in such an industry.
Cool. And I might actually come back and interrogate that a little bit after we finish doing this state round. Willie.
Apologies. In a perfect world, I wouldn't get kicked off the Zoom meeting because the technology would work. I missed some of the discussion just before, but I think, like everybody else, it's multi-leveled in a perfect world, what it would look like. Initially for me, it's just not losing my talent and my IP from Western Australia to all go and work in Victoria for the Victorian gaming industry. I mean, because we haven't had that level of support to be able to support development, we've lost a lot of people outside of Western Australia, and to arrest that is the first step. Obviously, having some properly funded and properly supported programs, which includes development, is a key plank. But talking to the gaming people here, it's more about getting into market, physically getting into market, and having those support mechanisms. And as Monica said, it's about enabling people to develop their business skills, so when they do go to market, that they're business ready. And I think this is an important thing that IGEA are supporting at the moment in terms of looking at getting people into market when we're out of the shutdown. But also, and again, it's consistent across the country that a clear understanding of the importance of the gaming industry needs to be achieved. And that's no reflection, I think, on the industry. It's more on governments and policymakers who have had this view that gamers are actually people playing Dungeons and Dragons in their bedrooms. It's far more complex, far more nuanced, far more sophisticated than that. And we look at it in Western Australia to some of the industrial applications that can derive from gaming technologies and gaming skills, and they're fantastic. And with the enabling of aeronautical space development, with a lot of the stuff that we're doing in science, the applications are quite astonishing. So it's opening that understanding up and getting the support that will see that develop further.
And Kate, job done in South Australia now?
Look, I think the rebate certainly achieves a number of kind of key, I suppose, developments for the industry that industry has told us is their main priority. including, you know, scaling and growing. It's going to attract inward investment into the game sector in South Australia. It's also going to, I suppose, if it does have the same success that our PDV rebate has had in South Australia, it will assist to create a centre of excellence, I suppose, of game development in South Australia, or cement that really, or sort of, you know, augment what we already have, which I think will address the issue of attraction and retention of sort of top senior skilled talent. That's certainly an area that the game development companies in South Australia are telling us is an issue for them. It's about how do they attract the world's best talent and how do they retain world's best talent in the state. And I think by having that, I suppose, you know, global destination in South Australia for video game development, that's one way to do that. I think it's also going to be important for diversifying the ecosystem. And one of the things that we've done with the video game development rebate guidelines that we've published in September, that we've included some expenditure that isn't included in, for example, international jurisdictions. So expenditures such as marketing expenses, legal costs, accounting, PR, and also community management. So those are the costs that I think are a really incredibly important part of you know, the industry that is game development. And by including those costs, we're going to be encouraging that ecosystem to set up around the game development companies to really service that whole industry. In a perfect world though, you know, as well as the rebate, we'd love to have a development fund so that we could continue to invest in South Australian generated IP and sort of startups and people at a sort of slightly different point in their career than what the rebate is going to service. So that is something we would love to continue to look towards. But right now, the message from industry has very loud and clear been we'd rather prioritise the funding in a limited funding environment towards a rebate. That's going to be the thing that is going to be the biggest sort of benefit to the industry at the moment in South Australia.
Thanks, Kate. It's interesting and heartening, I guess, the diversity of vision from around the states, that, you know, everyone's just not landing on the one solution, that, you know, there's this wide breadth of ways of ensuring that the industry is successful and supported, you know, from education to enterprise and, you know, right across the business of games. It was really interesting. Carolyn was talking about this, I guess, brand Australia. I don't know whether I'm oversimplifying it. And it's something that, you know, we've been interested in. We've talked to DFAT and Austrade and that about. But I'm wondering about, you know, is there a difficulty in having a brand Australia when we live in a Commonwealth and each of the agencies are, I guess, separate, and they have their own agendas and they have their own, I guess, visions of what the industry should look like? Can we make a brand Australia?
Can I drop in there, Ron?
Yeah, love to.
Because I thought that point that Caro made was absolutely fascinating. I think it's really important that everybody understands that although we as state and territory agencies work differently and work for our own states, we're incredibly collaborative, and we've been doing this together. And I don't think your viewers can see, but everybody's nodding. We've been working together really closely across all of the various kinds of content in genres that we fund. We're very used to it. So the notion of marketing whatever an Australian game or Australian game makers are is actually quite quite a normal process for us.
Have we seen that across games?
Sorry, I was just going to say, Ron, that's true, because success in one state is a success for all of us.
Yeah. And I also think that when you're in an international market, New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, Western Australia, South Australia can be quite meaningless. So brand Australia is really important.
And I think it also assists with the talent kind of issue that studios have. So, you know, it's a lot easier to share skilled talent between states than it is to share that talent internationally. And we want to make sure the best of the international talent is here in Australia, whether they're in South Australia or other states, and that's you know, only going to assist all of our businesses to access that talent in an easier and faster way.
And Ron, I think that we all acknowledge as states that Australia actually has a small population. So how can we be globally competitive? We've got some of the smartest game innovators in the world, and that was acknowledged in, you know, Untitled Goose Game and many other awards that other game developers have won over the period of time that I've been across games. My feeling is we're innately talented in this space, that the benefits over many years and decades to come are real in terms of skilled jobs and jobs that continue to innovate into the future using technology, and that gamification across other industries will also have an incredible benefit and value to the economy and to society. And so to have an Australian position is, as I think Willie was saying, it's better than having just a Victorian or just a New South Wales or just a state position. We must come together on this with a collective vision. And yes, actually build on our own areas of strength and close the gaps that each of our states clearly have, but certainly a unified approach to a vision for games in the best possible case scenario is where we should be heading.
I think it's probably...
Sorry, Alex.
I was just going to say, and I think it's really important to acknowledge here the role that IGEA has in relation to that, to follow on from what Caro was saying, and having the one banner for the industry is actually incredibly valuable. Of course, the other reason why we're more than happy to talk about Australia as game-making state, game-making jurisdiction is, as much as anything else, so we can all claim Untitled Goose Game, and it's not just Victorian.
You can do that. Absolutely.
Exactly.
I was just going to say as well, like as agencies, we've actually got good form in this space too, because we do all work collaboratively together in the film and TV space to attract international production to Australia incredibly successfully. So through our partner Ozfilm, you know, we already have, I suppose, a way of working together as agencies to have that brand Australia on an international level. And we've just seen that work, and I think that's just going to continue to work. You know, we're going to have to continue to work more and more closely as the international demand for content in both film and TV and games just booms, because, you know, this is a growing, there's a growing pie out there, and we all want as much as possible of that to come to Australia.
Yeah, it's is there any learnings from the other screen agencies on, you know, clearly, I mean, I guess we're the new kids on the block in some senses. So is there any learning for the other screen sectors, I guess, where that collaboration happens across all the states?
Yeah, so Ozfilm is what Kate brought up, which is an association, incorporated association that has a membership to it, as well as it is federally funded, and it has government members. So all the screen agencies pay an annual membership fee for that, as does Screen Australia, and also the Department of Arts and Communications funds that organisation, along with private membership, and those private members tend to be infrastructure partners, service businesses and so on, that reap the benefits of working on international productions attracted to Australia. So it is a model certainly that IGEA should look at for its future leadership and growth of the industry.
Thanks. And that is one of the things I did take copious notes on, so thank you.
The other thing I would just say, Ron, is that the way that the rebate works in South Australia is that it absolutely works in the sense of crossing state borders or international borders for that matter. So you can be doing some of your work in Victoria or Queensland or Tasmania, anywhere, and then for the portion that is done in South Australia, that's the portion you claim the rebate for. So do keep that in mind as well. Like, you know, the rebate is open to applicants, whether or not they're the rights holder or the service company. and it could be any number of South Australian service companies that might be engaged on a, the development of a game that could sort of trigger that expenditure threshold to be able to access the South Australian video game development rebate.
Probably worth pointing out there that that's the way almost all film and TV content in Australia is funded, is a collaboration across government agencies. I mean, you just need to watch the credits to see there's always at least 2 of our logos are there, often 3, sometimes 4. And that's what I was getting at before when I said we're very good at working collaboratively. We understand that sometimes it takes, more often than not, it takes more than one government agency's funding support to get something up. And I'm really looking forward actually to the opportunity of doing that for the games sector, to see, studios collaborating and their government agencies supporting them to get the games up.
It spreads the risk too. It's like, it's often, particularly for the small, well, for all jurisdictions, if you're the major investor and it goes belly up, then that can wipe out the majority of your funds, certainly for us. So we do look to collaborate, and we have often with Victoria. I don't think we've done anything with South Australia yet, but hopefully, we're making our way around the country, and I think it's the way to do it. And I do agree, it's Australia first, and then, by the way, we have all these jurisdictions, and I think as an outside brand, that is just so important. And it's great because, yes, we're Australia first, and there are those federal funds towards things, which we need, as Cara was saying, we really need to lock that down for the games industry and what those federal supports will be, because the legislation at the moment is still very much in that heritage, media of film and TV. Well, how does games fit in there? And then on top of that, you've got your state incentives and potential investment as well. And as with some of these games, the budgets are substantial, so you need to be going to the multiple states. And I think one of the great things that's come out of COVID is actually, as state agencies, we're talking a heck of a lot more than I think we ever have, because we do these fortnightly meetings. So and doing this is kind of like what we've done every week really for the last the last 6 months or so. So I think the sort of collaboration at the state agency level is big, and I think as a lobby group potentially to go to federal government to be able to say to educate them in what the opportunities are and what's been missed, I think is fantastic.
And is that realistic, Monica? Is the group that you're talking about one of the right groups to approach the Commonwealth government and ask them to support what's happening in each of the states and territories?
You said you weren't going to hold us to any of this.
No. It's still a perfect world. We're still in a perfect world.
In the perfect world, yes. I think we are the people. We are the ones that are understanding what's happening in the industry, what's happening in our area. Like, we have to be providing jobs for students. There are hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of students who are coming out in this field. What jobs are there? Are we going to be sending them overseas? Could we, are we going to lure them to overseas? So, it is about job creation and all of those really important economic drivers that I don't think the government quite understands. And I think it's once again, it's that education, I know, like, of understanding how games development works, because of course, even the word development is different between film and TV and games, so there are these subtle differences, and it's almost, I feel, sometimes in the too hard basket. We don't understand it. Look, we're dealing with you on film and TV. We can see that. We can see Canberra on screen. We can see Australia on screen. That doesn't work in games. So, finding what those, they need to understand the economic benefits of supporting the industry.
And that's,
yeah.
To that point, Monica, and again, it goes back to the point that Carol and everyone else is making. It is about that understanding that, without wanting to diminish traditional screen, that the gaming sector is huge and is going to get a lot bigger. And an appreciation of what an investment will deliver, the returns that that investment will deliver, can be manifold back into the economy. And again, it's jobs and growth.
Thank you. And it's while we're talking about the perfect world, then how does IGEA, or how does the industry and IGEA, what do we do, or what do we do better to reach that perfect world, or to help you reach that perfect world?
Ron, I think it's this. This is our first unified conversation. This is the inaugural meeting of. I'm quite sure that we would be all willing to lend our minds, our insights, our voices to a clear direction that is led by IGEA as the representative body of your members and of the games industry to lift towards a vision that is achievable. And my thing is, I suppose I keep looking at games as being a completely untapped opportunity, even though we think that Victoria might be shining a light, having, you know, given its 25 years of funding and so on. The funding is still inadequate. We need to be spending more in the game sector. It is worth more. It has a longer term future. It will be more and more integrated into film and TV, and we will only be talking screen potentially in 5 and 10 years from now. What is our collective vision on that full integration? How are we skill sharing across those sectors? So I'm quite sure that, you know, we'd be willing to meet once a quarter to talk, you know, games strategy and how we're going to conquer the world.
And it is that shared view, I think, Caro, very much that we not feed off one another. We tend to learn from one another's experiences, and, you know, looking at SAFC with the rebate and how that's operating, it's a really important learning. And I think one of the other things where the IGEA is incredibly valuable is the research that you do, and the development of materials that we can use, that we use in our submissions to government to get for them to get an understanding of what the industry is about, and the size and the size but the potential of it is really important.
I think that's right. I think IGEA actually do a really fantastic job on that front, educating government and other sectors, I suppose, as to the potential and scale of the game development industry. I think, you know, the way that the video game development rebate was able to be successfully brought in South Australia is by pointing to the success of a similar industry being the post-production and visual effects industry. So using those successes of similar industries, and hopefully using the success of the rebate in South Australia to sort of trigger more and more conversations about, you know, the rebate maybe being mirrored in other states and federally. I think that will hopefully be an incredibly useful tool as well to be able to point to that data.
Yeah, I guess I would third that. I'm really feeling the difference here between the Australia Council and the role that we have as supporting like the subsidised art sector, and then all of you who are working in Screen broadly defined with this experience in market development. And there's a kind of expertise in that commercial world that, of course, the Australia Council has interest in through the research team and through our strategic work, but that's not the point of our funding program. But I work in research, so a lot of the work that I'm doing, looking more broadly and looking at the creative industries more broadly, is about providing evidence for advocacy. And I guess that's definitely an area where we could help as well. Not only because we have researchers and expertise, but we have a lot of experience in having to make these arguments about the values for us, the value of arts and culture, and public value of arts and culture. And of course, there are the economic arguments, which your sector has in spades. The economic arguments are really powerful. And you have the business models and you have the subscription models. You have all kinds of things on your side with which to argue that this is an untapped market and that it has all of this added value or potential value, latent value. So I guess, yeah, identifying those arguments, and they're not only economic, right? I know that this work is already being done in the DA20's Power of Games report. There are the identification of the value of games in other parts of like, for well-being, for education, for the aged care demographic. So yeah, I guess that's definitely an area where I think those arguments could be developed collaboratively and be put to good use.
And Ron, one other thing that I'd like to raise too is that we have to create an encouraging environment for big ideas and big innovation that is Australian-owned IP. I think that has got to be at our core, because the more we own, the more successful we will be in terms of our exportability and also the ability to monetize particular innovations across the board. So there's the balance of that as well, and ensuring we're encouraging the most exceptional talent, Australian talent, to be developed through this industry is also something that we're very much focused on at Film Victoria.
Thank you. Did the producers giving me the, you know, we're nearly at the end of time signal here, but does anyone else have anything to add?
Yeah, let's get to work.
Yeah. Sorry, Kate, did your hand go up then? No.
Yes, Ron, sorry. I was just going to say, talk to us and talk to each other, because not only should the agencies be talking to each other, but we hope games developers are talking to each other and then bringing ideas to us. So we would really encourage that, to be in contact with us or any of your state agency if you've got ideas and you want to see your business grow in Australia.
I think that's a perfect way to summarise it. And look, I just want to say thank you for everyone for joining this. You know, Caroline said, you know, this should be the start. And, you know, I guess I didn't come into the panel thinking that we'd finish saying this is the start of the conversation, not the end of the conversation. So thank you for saying that, because on behalf of the industry, you know, I'm very excited to continue this conversation with everybody and, you know, work out how do we create a brand Australia? How do we ensure that we lift everybody up, irrespective of where they operate from, and irrespective of what sort of funding or support is there? So I'm really excited. Clearly, I've got something to do once GCAP's finished and we've had maybe a couple of days sleep. But thank you all for participating. So Carolyn, Kate, Alex, Willie, Monica, Kylie and Christen, it's been incredible. We hope that we continue the conversation, and we hope that the developers within your states continue the conversation or even start the conversation with you. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.